Hello, and welcome to this presentation on transitions and pronoun reference in Edit 911 series on editing a dissertation, how a professional editor finds and fixes problems. To set the scene, here's a quote from the publication manual of the American Psychological Association. The primary objective of scientific reporting is clear communication. You can achieve this by presenting ideas in an orderly manner and by expressing yourself smoothly and precisely. This sort of sums up in a nutshell why academic writers need to make effective use of transitions and pronoun reference. Let's look more closely at why these are key elements of clear, coherent, and convincing academic writing. First of all, they help readers to structure and present their thoughts logically and concisely, which in turn allows readers to more easily follow the writer's train of thought. Of course, an effective use of transitions and pronoun reference is an important skill to master in any type of writing, but it's especially important in dissertations with relatively long, complex, and abstract passages. But student writers often don't use these tools effectively because they fail to put themselves in their reader's shoes. What seems crystal clear to them is instead perceived by their readers as a disconnected text with an unclear reasoning process. If you're having trouble following a student's line of reasoning and find yourself going back over a chunk of text to try to make sense of it, it likely has something to do with this problem. Let's turn first to transitions. These are also called linking words or connectors, and you can see some examples in the balloon below. They're important because they make relations between ideas explicit and act as helpful signposts to guide readers through a line of reasoning. When writers use them effectively, they're able to steer their argument in the direction that they intend. In other words, they're telling readers how ideas should be connected and how they should be understood, which makes the text more authoritative and persuasive. Here's a table that shows some examples of transitions grouped according to the textual functions that are commonly needed in dissertations, like addition, comparison, contrast, elaboration, emphasis, illustration, restatement, cause, effect, and generalization. There are lots of similar classifications on the internet that are freely available to students, so it would be a good idea for them to keep something like this handy as they're writing. Now let's go through some common transition pitfalls and see how to improve them. All the examples in this presentation are based on academic writing that was submitted to Edit 911 for editing. For reasons of space, only a few lines are shown, but just imagine how these types of problems would be amplified when these examples are embedded in a relatively lengthy paragraph. The first pitfall is the lack of transition. Here's an example. A larger scale study would have strengthened the research results. Performing a randomized controlled trial would increase the validity of the study, which seems disconnected. In the improved version, by inserting the additive transition moreover, it becomes clear that the second sentence is building on the first by adding another related argument, probably in a discussion of limitations in a research study. Transition pitfall 2 is the wrong choice of transition that results in an unclear reasoning process. Here's an example. When students lack supervision or proper instruction on the use of technology, they can easily fall prey to cyber criminals. Further, students may also be the perpetrators of cybercrimes when they use social media to harass other students. But the transition further doesn't accurately capture the relationship between the two sentences. In the improved version, the contrastive transition, however, makes the opposite roles of victim and perpetrator within the same group of people, in this case students, much clearer. The third pitfall is the incorrect use of a transition that creates a sentence structure error. This example shows whereas as a standalone transition at the beginning of a sentence. But whereas is the type of transition that must introduce a subordinate clause within a sentence. There are two ways to fix this. First, Whereas can simply be transformed into a subordinating conjunction to join the two sentences into one that contains a main clause and a subordinate clause. This works well if the new sentence does not become too long and difficult to understand. Otherwise, the two sentences can be kept separate, but replacing whereas with a standalone transition or a conjunctive adverb in grammatical terms that has the same meaning, like in contrast in this case. To avoid these transition pitfalls that we've seen here, students should be encouraged to carefully re-examine their writing to determine where a transition could improve information flow. Let's move on now to pronoun reference, meaning the relationship between a pronoun and the word that it stands for, which is called the antecedent or sometimes the referent. This relationship needs to be unambiguous for a clear and coherent text. Here are a couple of examples. In the first, there's no doubt that they refers back to these criteria. In the second, its clearly refers to the nursing profession. In both examples, pronouns and antecedents are relatively close to each other and grammatically matched in terms of plural and singular forms, which results in a clear and coherent message. But this isn't always the case in dissertations with long and complex passages where student writers may have very clear in their minds exactly what these relationships are, but fail to make them sufficiently explicit to their readers. The first and very common pitfall is the lack of grammatical agreement between the pronoun and the antecedent. In this example, the singular form of the antecedent, a decision maker, doesn't match the plural form of the pronoun they. This is easily corrected by transforming the whole chain into the plural, which also requires an adjustment to the verb form. Plural forms are preferable to using the pronoun he or she generically, or an awkward combination like he/she. When using plural forms is not an option because a singular noun is actually necessary, rephrasing to avoid the need for a pronoun is another possibility, as shown in the second corrected version. The second pitfall is vagueness created by the lack of antecedent. In this example, the pronoun this is used to refer to the content of the entire previous sentence rather than any clear antecedent, which is fine for informal writing, but not for dissertations, also because the previous text could be quite long and cause readers to lose track of what this refers to. In the improved version, the noun practice has been inserted after this, which makes the connection to the previous sentence much clearer. The third pitfall is when multiple antecedents create confusion. In this example, it's not clear whether it refers to the pilot group or the control group. This can be fixed in two ways. First, by just repeating the intended antecedent, in this case the pilot group, or by using another option like the latter that acts as a pronoun and provides clarity. In the fourth pitfall, the antecedent is too distant from the pronoun. This can easily cause the reader to miss the connection between the two and compromise understanding. In this example, the pronoun it, referring to the antecedent the new model, appears after 81 words across two intervening sentences that elaborate on a particular aspect. In the improved version, the antecedent, the new model, has simply been repeated. The last pitfall involves repetitiveness and redundancy created by the failure to even use pronoun forms. Here's an example. Because the participants have memory loss, some of the participants had difficulties recalling information during the interviews. The repetition of the participants in such close proximity makes the text sound redundant. Here's the improved version. Because the participants have memory loss, some of them had difficulties recalling information during the interviews, where using the pronoun them to avoid repeating the participants results in a smoother and more streamlined way of expressing this idea. To deal with the pronoun reference pitfalls that we've seen here, students could be encouraged to carefully reread and revise text to make sure that all antecedents of pronouns are grammatically matched and easily understood, especially in longer passages, and to check for repetitive uses of nouns that can be replaced with pronouns to improve flow, coherence, and clarity. To wrap up this presentation, here are a couple of links dealing with transitions and pronoun reference that you might find useful to recommend to students. Thank you for listening.